Hi guys. Okay, so I am starting a 12-inch tutorial, and this is going to be broken up into a few different videos, but the first one we are going to paint our background, do a blended background. And so the colors that I'm going to be using are Pistachio Mint, Sea Breeze, Jadeite Glass, Coral Cloud, and Vintage Pink. So that's our colors. You're also going to need a flat, wide brush. This is 4 inches. 3 inches will work if you have a 3-inch brush. Whatever flat brush you have should do the job because this is a small board. So a 1-inch would be kind of hard, but a 2 might work. 3 definitely will. 4 for sure. And then you want another flat brush that's narrow, so 1 inch, 1.5 inch, something like that. And it doesn't matter the brand of brush. You just want something where the bristles are kind of soft. You don't want really wiry bristles because it'll leave brush strokes in your paint. All right, I have gessoed and sanded this only because there was a background on here before and I don't want it to bleed through, so I put some white gesso down and sanded it. But I don't normally gesso my boards. But I do, before I put the paint down, I put a layer of matte medium down, and that is because without it, when we squirt the paint on the board, it will kind of like, before we blend it, we squirt it on there and then we blend it, but the squirt lines where I've squirted it on kind of cooks into the wood and leaves a shadow behind. So I put a coat of matte medium down in between my board and my paint. And once we get this down, we want to go ahead and start working pretty quick. And I should have painted my edges first, but that's all right. We'll do it different step. All right, so there's a coat of that. Now I'm going to use my colors in the order Pistachio Mint in the very center, then Sea Breeze, then Jadeite Glass, then Coral Cloud, and then Vintage Pink. You don't want to put colors that are complements on the color wheel. So in other words, across the color wheel from each other. Across from blue on the color wheel is orange. So when you mix those two together, they look beautiful together. Complements look great together, but they don't mix well together. So blue and orange would make mud. So I want to separate my blue and orange by putting the Jadeite Glass in between. I don't want the blue up against the orange blending and getting a band of mud in my background. Purple and yellow are complements, red and green are complements. So you want to keep that in mind when deciding what order to lay your paint down. Also, a turntable is almost, I would have to say, just about a necessity for this. It'd be really difficult to do without one. But you want to go ahead. Now I've got 5 colors, so I don't have, I want to be mindful of my spacing. So that was Pistachio Mint. Now comes Sea Breeze. You don't want to use too much because it'll make a big mess on you as you blend outwards. All right. And then jadeite glass. And then coral cloud. And I'm gonna hold off on vintage pink, and I'll do that last after I'll show you. I do that at the end. Okay, so then you take your wider flat brush and you want to set it down so that the edge of the brush is on your center dot, and just start spinning the board. You don't want to bear down with the brush too hard. You just kind of want to let it glide over the board and over your paint. Spin until your paint is distributed, and then start moving the brush outward towards the edge. Slowly. Spinning, spinning, spinning. So I'm just moving my brush out to the edge. Getting it nice and blended, and then spin and pick up your brush as you spin. Then we're going to take our vintage pink now. Just make a thin band of that. I don't like to put my darkest color on my big brush because sometimes I have to go back in and reblend, and I don't want to have my dark color on there because it takes over. And also a lot of times coming to the edge, it doesn't do a really good job with the big brush. So I'm just going to take the little brush now with that vintage pink. And by the way, my brushes were damp. They were wet and then wiped, dried off, you know, the excess, but they were still damp. You want to use not dry brushes because it's easier to blend with a damp brush. Okay, so spin and lift, and there we go. I can see I've got some brush strokes I don't like in here. So I'm going to take this brush here. That's going to make it pink everywhere, but I'm just going to get rid of those brush strokes. Now see, this is why you have to work quick, because once it dries, you can't do anything with it anymore. You can't blend anymore. You can't. Okay, that's better. So there we go. There's our background. And then I'll do the edges in vintage pink. So paint the edges in the outer edge in vintage pink. And I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll be back to put some guidelines down and sketch it out. See you next time.